And I don't know these questions, so make sure you tell them. Like we did not go over the questions beforehand.
We did not. I didn't send them to her. We wanted this to be very authentic because we want it to come from our true selves. We can't ask you all to be open, and we're not open ourselves, right? So she has not seen. She might have a general idea of what I might be asking, but she genuinely doesn't know. All right, so let's just jump into it with Brooke just telling us a bit about your childhood background. Was it like, what's your earliest memory?
Okay, so I grew up in Southeast San Diego, right? Those of you who know. We called it like the suburbs, right, of Southeast because it was in this cool little quaint, I guess, dead end street. We call it a cul-de-sac, but today they call them like dead end streets. Anyways, I grew up pretty great. I mean, I had a mom. I did have a dad at some point, which we'll go over, momentarily. I had grandparents that were in the house. Obviously, in the early 90s, a lot of the families, right? We all had our grandparents somewhere close by, but I was blessed enough to be able to have them in the home with me, right? Helping to raise me, obviously look after me. As I did grow up, right? The majority of my childhood was with a single mom. So yes, my grandparents were very involved. And just to kind of speak on my dad, right? So when I was about 6, 7 years old, my dad passed away. He was insanely sick. He had, I believe, he had childhood diabetes that sort of just took him out. I mean, I don't know a better phrase to use, Crystal, but over time, right? So he went through his, teenage years, just really ill. And as we know, I believe type 1 or type 2, I don't quote me, right? But whatever diabetes he had sort of caused other issues, right? So, you go on to medication for one situation, and then you have like 4 other ailments, blah, blah, blah. So my earliest childhood memory, right, which is crazy that I remember this, but my dad was very ill. And obviously my parents were not together. Right. They had their own personal issues. We don't need to go into that. But they were not together. So they had what we would call today like 50-50 custody, right? Where I would go to my father's home for like a week, and then I would be with my mom. Once he got super sick, though, that obviously had to change. So I would be with my mom, right, most of the time, and she would sort of supervise our visits. Earliest childhood memory would be probably like the last couple months of my dad's life. I remember him, again, he was very ill and he wanted me to come over. So just to preface this as well, my dad was very involved. I was very blessed. Obviously, I have very little memory of this, but I was very blessed to have a father that really, really wanted me around, wanted to be a dad, wanted to be involved. I hear all the stories, right? I of course, don't remember that, but he was very involved. So obviously him getting sick, not being able to see his kid. And as a parent today, I can only imagine how he felt, especially when I believe that we know when we are dying. We know when the end of our life is coming, right? Whether that be from a dream, a feeling, right? A connection to our creator, whatever that may be, we do know. And I think he did. And so anyway, long story short, my mom was going to bring me over to his house, but she needed to make sure that there was someone there. I'm not going to mention who that someone was, but there was supposed to be someone there, right, to help in case he got sick, right? Because again, my dad was in and out of the hospital, right? In and out, 911 being called. So she didn't want me to be put in a situation. And again, as a parent, like I wouldn't want that either. A little small child would have to call 911. So long story short, she takes me over there, right? She gets her mommy's night out, which is awesome for her. And she leaves me with him, with my dad. I just remember, and again, my memory's clouded, but I remember him being sick. And I remember looking at the person that was supposed to be there to help. And she told me basically she was leaving. And as a 6-year-old kid, it's crazy because I've always been very, very intuitive and way, way, way too mature for my age, right? And I remember saying like in my head, like, you're not supposed to leave. My mom trusted you, right, to bring me here and to watch the situation. And he's clearly sick. He was so sick, he was literally vomiting blood. So as a kid, you can only imagine, like, that is so scary. I didn't know what to do. I was so afraid. And she left. She left me with my very ill father who was vomiting blood. And I remember him saying he needed to eat something so he could take his medication. So of course I'm scrambling, trying to like help him, get his medication. And he tells me to just cook some eggs. Well, I'm already a very like short lady, right? As a grown adult. So I'm sure I was a very short kid. I remember I couldn't even see the stove, right? I remember like trying to like mix the eggs. And I remember my arm was like super extended. And the eggs were popping right on me and the grease was popping and I was crying. And I remember I was able to give him something. So I somehow put it on the plate, took it to him. And I ran to the closet, and I remember trying to call my mom. And of course I called my mom. And when I heard her, it made everything better. She of course was on her way. And she just kept telling me, wait. I remember her saying, wait. And I remember in that moment, I hung up the phone. And I don't know why I hung up, because my mom was still talking, and I'm sure she called me right back. But I hung up and I said, God, just let him go. Like, just let him die, right? Because he was miserable, like completely miserable. And I remember saying that. And I'm not kidding you, Crystal, probably like a few months after, he died. And I think what that did to my psyche at such a young age, right, was that created a sense of course, guilt, extreme guilt, because I really believed, and it's crazy, because I think I still believe that in my teenage years. And my mom had mentioned me saying that to her, and she tried to tell me like it wasn't your fault. But I remember like still thinking that. Like, I felt extreme guilt because I wanted my dad alive, but you wanted God to take him. So it's your fault, right? Mm-hmm. Not only that, but it made me tougher, because it made me say, you know what? Suck it up. It's your fault. Your dad died because you said, you prayed this prayer. Because again, what was I taught as a kid? What we pray is what? Okay. So again, that this whole message kind of creates who I am, right? Because my story is a story of projection. I believe that's the perfect word for it. Projection. So I believe I prayed that, God gave me that, that prayer, and it's my fault. Suck it up. And I've lived a life like that, right? But anyway, that was my earliest childhood memory. And I believe that guilt, right, and that suck it up attitude and deal with it, because that was your choice, right, really created who I am as a person today.
Thank you for sharing that. That was, I couldn't imagine as a mom myself, right, of my daughter, me and her father weren't together, even though he's passed, and her calling me just as on the mom side and saying, this is what's happening. Your whole world is falling apart at that moment. You can't get to your child fast enough. Yeah. And then being in that child in that situation. Yeah. Right. But going back to what has been instilled in you of, let me talk to God about this, not call 911. Let me talk to God about this. Yeah. So tell me, how do you think being a part of the group that you were in, how do you think that either helped you or hindered you? Because you said you struggled with that feeling and those thoughts even into your teenage years. Yeah. Do you feel like it helped you process through those feelings, or do you think actually it amplified it?
It probably amplified it. And I think let me just take a moment to, after my father passed away, right, and the PTSD, again, I remember sitting on the front row of his funeral, like looking at his corpse, and all of these things framed me. Because like today, I don't really go to funerals. Like I've had really close people to me die. I can't go, right? I'm also, I don't like cooking, right? So a lot of things you think like you don't remember, your psyche does. And so I grew up, and at this time, I wasn't in the cult that I'm going to discuss today. I grew up in like a Kojic church, right? We call it Pentecostal Church of God in Christ. It wasn't as strict, as what we're going to discuss. I was raised, I believe God, I believe Jesus. I was a Christian. I wasn't really into church, so I was just like the kid that had to go because my grandparents, my mom made me go. We only went like one day a week. That was probably, to be honest with you, that was probably my most healthiest church experience, was when I was a small adolescent child. Around the age of like 12, my mom started saying she didn't want to go to that church anymore, right? She needed something more. And it wasn't let me preface this. It wasn't anything negative about that church. She was looking for something different. So around the age of 13, right, is when she found something different. I will not be using the church's name, but we joined a church that my mom went, all into immediately. I remember, and this is when I met you, right? But I remember, she was like, okay, you guys are going to come with me to this church. I remember walking into this church. I couldn't believe it because I came from a small family church, right? I walk into this church, this massive, guys. This is not how do I say this? This is not like your regular, like you pull over to the, like you see a church just go inside. No. These are thousands of members. They had multiple sessions, right? Morning, afternoon, and night. Every day there was something to go to at this church, right? In the beginning, I was like, absolutely not. Like I was a regular preteen, living my life, you know what I mean? Turning up. Like that was what I wanted to do. I didn't care anything about church. I had a relationship with God, right? But I had no rules when it came to what I was supposed to do. So then we start going to this church, and it took me a minute. So obviously I'm not, okay. So if you know me, you know that I'm an introvert. I don't really, do well in like large social settings. I've always been that way. They called it shy, but it's just an introvert. So it takes me a long time to get to know someone, to like trust someone, let them in, etc. I'm also, though, you cross me, right? I can let you go so quickly. So I'm very just like black and white with that. And I've accepted that today. But during that time, my mom was like, you need friends, because she knew who I was. She knew who I was. So she knew if she wanted to get me involved in that church, that I needed to find a crew, right? Like a little clique, somebody or a little group that I felt like I belonged to, so that I would go. And that's really what she did. She set something up I'll never forget. She set this little thing up where I met all of you guys, and that's kind of what happened, right? I liked, the friends that I had met. I felt sort of like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I knew it was a little strict, and I'm sure your question is gonna head that way next. There was some strange rules that I did not fully understand, but again, like the theme of my life is projection, and I'm going to touch on that a lot, right? A lot of these cults project this perfection onto you that they can't even, live up to. So the rules I was not understanding. I'm like, we're teenagers. Like, this is wild. I remember meeting Crystal. It was completely normal to her, right? Like, all these rules was normal, and I'm like, this is normal. Like, this is straight. So then what happened to me, right? I started feeling like, well, dang, something's wrong with me, because all these young people that are my age, they called it like on fire for God, right? On fire for God, all these things. And I'm like, dang, what's wrong with me? Because I'm not really fitting in well here, right? But I like the people. So I started saying, you know what? I'm going to go more, and I'm going to learn more. And
well, let's sit in that for a little bit, right? Because that does lead into my next question of what attracted you to the group? So is it safe to say that it was the people and the personalities of the young people that you met there?
Can you still hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Yeah, who knows what's going on? It'll connect again. So basically, how can I say this? I would just say meeting the friend groups that I met sort of made me feel like I belonged in that moment. I mean, I think there was always a certain point where I felt like this is weird. I always felt that. Like, I always felt like this is odd. I don't know what it was. I mean, it's crazy, because I think back, like, what was that? Because again, I didn't have much church experience. I didn't have there's my green screen. Hello. I didn't have like what's the word? Like church lingo, right? Because like with you, and I have to put you into this so I can kind of compare and contrast. Like, you were used to this lifestyle. You were used.
I was indoctrinated from day one, right? So I was born into it. I remember everything. I have pictures of my dedication. I could tell you everything. I knew how to walk. I knew how to talk. I knew what to say. I knew the songs. I knew everything.
Yes. Yeah. So you had that indoctrination, I guess we can call it that. I didn't. So like, I knew something was weird, but I was like, okay, like, again, I liked you guys. I liked the people. It wasn't the message. It wasn't what they were doing. It was the people. And listen, think about that, right? A lot of cults, what do they do first? They always have you meet these awesome people. Now, I'm gonna preface this. I don't believe the crew, right, that I met at that time purposefully did that to me. I do not believe that. But they were used as a tool to sort of bring me in to this indoctrination. And I'll just say it like that.
So would you say that joining the group at your age and presenting it to you the way it was presented to you, would you say that it gave you a sense of belonging and purpose?
Well, yeah, at the moment, I mean, at the time, of course, I'm speaking from my brain today, so it's super hard to like remember then. But yes, I remember feeling, that's what I'm saying. I remember feeling like I belonged. I was like, this is cool. This is it's a different crowd than when I hang out with at school. Because again, I was turning up at school. You know what I mean? I was doing things I probably had no business doing. Sorry, Mom, but I was, everybody saw me as like this really good kid, but I was really doing some things. And so I think it was cool because it was like, it was just different. Like, they were positive. They weren't doing the things that my friends at school were doing. And something touched me, right? I would hear, the preaching, and I would hear the message, and I'd be like, okay, like, I can get with this. Like, yeah, slowly but surely, right? I can get with this. This is, even though it's weird, like, I think I can do this.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that you brought up something. I don't even know if you realize you did it, right? I asked the question, I said, did it give you a sense of belonging and purpose? You said yes. However, you weren't even necessarily seeking that out or longing for it. So thinking back on it, are you able to identify where you started to feel the need for belonging by this group?
Probably when I got probably when I was indoctrinated. I think there was a point where I started going to all, so I can't pinpoint the moment. I just know there was a point. We had an awesome youth group, and that's really where I think everything sort of grew, right? I was completely indoctrinated. Let me give you some examples of what that looks like, right? So indoctrination meant, professing your belief, right? And Jesus, and let me be clear, right? Not just Jesus, okay? Because my grandparents, I'll never forget, there's a guilt inside of me a little bit. And again, because of my childhood, I carry some guilt, right? But it makes me have guilt over things I probably shouldn't, but I do. So I remember when I was fully indoctrinated in this cult, they taught that Jesus, right? The Holy Ghost and God are one. Like, now listen to how this is all the same thing. That's the apostolic, right? Denomination. Then you have the Kojic denomination. That's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's literally the same thing. Okay. But anyways, apostolics teach that if you don't believe in their doctrine, right, that, hey, Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit are all one. And if you don't profess that, you're not going to heaven. You're not saved. So what did that cause in my little 12, 13-year-old brain to do is say, well, if I don't believe this, I'm not going to go to heaven. But guess who didn't follow that doctrine? My grandparents. Okay. And my grandparents were the most pious people I literally have ever known. Okay. And I remember like having a discussion with them, and they had their Bible out and I had my Bible out, and we're going over, and they're just like, they're telling me like, it's the same thing. Like, okay, we get what you're saying, but it's the same. And I was arguing with my grandparents, and I remember them looking at each other, and I'll never forget. Because as an adult now, I'm like, oh my God, they probably were looking at each other. And I'm just speculating, right? But I believe this is what happened. They were probably looking at each other and like, oh my gosh, like this isn't healthy. Because the way we were taught to, spread the message was so judgmental. And if you did not believe in what we were saying, you have to be baptized, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be baptized. What was it again? Because Lord knows what was it?
Baptized filled with the Holy Ghost with the evidence of speaking in other heavenly tongues.
That
which is a completely different subject that we'll get on because if there's no interpreter present, but never mind.
Exactly. So no matter what, me and my grandparents both believe in Jesus. We both were Christians, but my Christianism, right? That's my word. My Christianism was better than everybody else's. And we literally lived that way. I'm talking at school. Now, we were high schoolers. Like, we were high school kids that were being taught this. So we would go out and we would spread the message, and we would meet awesome people who were also Christians. But it didn't matter because you weren't my Christian. And if you don't let me, you know what I mean? Like, somehow go into your brain and indoctrinate you, I'm not hanging out with you. Okay. So not only did we have an insane message that you had to believe it in the way we said it, which is insane, we also couldn't wear pants. Listen to this, right? So we only could wear skirts. And when I tell you, it's so funny because I will be out and about and I will see an apostolic, and I know exactly. I know exactly. I don't even have to talk to them. And I'm just like, oh God. And it triggers me. You got to wear skirts, and they needed to go below your knee. Now me and Crystal, we were considered a little rebellious. So we would, maybe have a muzzity. Hello, we were teenagers, okay? And we were super cute teenagers. And I believe, again, projection. They wanted us to look as old as they did, as washed as they did. Let's just be real. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. So we couldn't wear pants. We couldn't go to the movies. We couldn't listen to, whirly music. What else couldn't we do?
No jewelry.
No jewelry.
No makeup.
We needed to be at like every service. I mean, okay, a Sunday we would go to morning service.
7 a.m.
Yeah, 7 a.m. We would even be up there during the Spanish ministry service. What was it? What's in between? See, I'm like forgetting these things.
We had morning service, Sunday school.
Yes.
Afternoon service, Spanish service. That's if we didn't go to another church during the Spanish service and then be back for evening service.
Right. So we spent our entire Sunday at church. And then, okay, luckily for me, because we were exhausted. Okay. Literally exhausted. Usually didn't have to go to school on Mondays. Thank goodness my mom let me stay home. Right. But my grandma thought that was insane. Like, what do you mean? Long story. We were tired. But the whole point is, right, this is what these cults do, is they want to not only indoctrinate you, but keep you so indoctrinated where you can't think for yourself. Literally brings you to exhaustion. Read the Bible until you fall asleep. Listen to worship music until you fall asleep. Turn on the word and listen to preaching until you fall asleep. Like, How is that healthy at all in any type of, institution? When is that ever healthy? But that's what they do. And I'm telling you, you start thinking this through, you're like, oh my God, like I was consistently indoctrinated. Then you have Monday, there was something every day. Then you have Bible study on Wednesday. Then you have multiple choir rehearsals. It was always something. And so what we did as teenagers is we lived that way for years. I mean, we would go up to the church, even after school. We would leave school, go straight to church. Thank goodness we were smart kids and we, were able to go to college and stuff. But if you think about it, how did we do homework? How did we get our work done? How did we get good grades? Because nobody at the church was asking about grace. You know what I mean? Nobody was saying like, oh, how are you guys doing in school? How's your emotional health? Nobody cared. Nobody cared about that. So yeah, anyway, that was a long response, but that's kind of what it looked like as teenagers. And this went on for years. Also, I'd like to bring up, right, because I'm remembering these things. We also took a vow for purity. Now, let me explain this purity culture that is so toxic. It is incredibly toxic because it's like, okay, our young girls and boys, because it was always the girls first, right? Like the boys were a focus, but the boys were not a focus like the girls. And we all know the misogynistic culture of these cults, but I'm telling you, we lived it, right? The girls were the focus. The boys were there, but we were the focus. So anyways, we basically had to go in front of the church. We took these purity vows that we would not have sex until marriage. We had these rings on. When we're taking these vows, our leaders are doing just that. Like they're sleeping around. They're having other affairs. They're like, are you kidding me? So again, projection. We were supposed to be perfect. We were supposed to be these perfect creatures, but they didn't have to be perfect. Does that make sense?
Yep. And it was perfection defined by their standard, right? I think it's also important. I want to stop here for a little bit because I think it's important to note we volunteered to do these things. Like it's not even like it was shoved down our throat is the wrong word to use, but the way it was presented to us, it was so manipulative, right? And I think that it's safe to say, I think that's where a lot of the anger comes from, right? It was so manipulative in the way it was presented to one. And I'm not saying that I want my 16-year-old daughter that I don't have yet out there sleeping around. That's not what I'm saying. But instead of actually sitting down and having the conversation of, this is actually why we think you should wait. Not because this Jesus sits on the throne or anything, but it's because I don't think that you're emotionally ready for this. I don't think that you're physically ready for this. And here's why, because this can be the consequence of that, right? Which is a much healthier conversation, right? Instead of you're going to go to hell if you lay down and do this.
But let's be clear though, right? Like, yes, we volunteered to do these things, but you guys, okay. What people have to realize, because I watch a lot of cult, videos on how people got out, and I watch the comments, and you always see these same comments that are like, "Well, you didn't have to do it," and like, "Didn't you see the red flags?" No, again, you're indoctrinated. You can't think for yourself. You can't. First of all, we were indoctrinated children. That's totally different than being an adult that is indoctrinated. Although I still feel for the adults because again, it's indoctrination. So again, we're being told all these years, you're going to go to hell if you have sex before marriage. You are going to go to hell if you don't follow the rules, right?
And the fear of rejection of if you don't follow these things, I think is so important to discuss as well, which also is a big part of indoctrinating the young group, right? Because when you're young, what do you want more than acceptance? And if the adults who are supposed to be protecting me are telling me I need to do this and I need to be protected, and this is what's going to protect me from them, of course I'm going to do it, right? And so I kind of let's lead into the next part of this. You and I have spoken before about this in the past, because you just spoken a little bit of, then we went out and attempted to indoctrinate others and do all these things. I've spoken to you about how I've had to get over the guilt of that.
Yes.
Meaning I remember speaking to people I considered friends and I'm like, you're this way. Yes, you are. And convinced, and I'm not going to say convinced myself, but I genuinely was like, this is from a place of love. I love them. So I'm telling them they're going to hell, right? Yes. I'm telling them they're doing these things. And when I look back on it, I have a very vivid memory of one specific person. And I remember him sitting there looking at me and him looking straight ahead as I'm going in on him, and a tear started to roll down his cheek. And I kid you not, there can be random parts of my week, month, and it will just pop in my head because I've had to get over the guilt of making him feel unsafe with me, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how you've been able to overcome that within yourself. Because when leaving the cult, there is a bit of guilt when you start to realize some of the things you've done, some of the things you've said. How did you overcome that? And are you still working through that today?
So I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to put some more, I guess, perspective on it, right? So, because you got to understand how things happen to understand how things ended, right? So, yes, I mean, again, we were in high school, right? And we were, witnessing is what we used to call it. We were witnessing, and again, like a cult where it was like the more people you bring in, the closer you are to God. I'm sorry. It just sounds insane now, right? But again, indoctrination. So I'm trying to keep my brain in that moment, not now. So the more people you bring in, the closer you are to God. The more money you give, right? The closer you are to God. And it was not about like the basic tithing. No, we went to a multi-million-dollar church. Get it? Don't get it twisted. Again, multi-million-dollars. Okay, people pouring their life savings. Okay, because they're being told, the more money you give, the closer you are to receiving your blessing. Really, what we call it is what is it called? The prosperity gospel, which is my worst enemy. It is horrific because you're basically being told that the more money you give, the more saved you are. And that's just disgusting. But anyway, that's what we kind of understood and what we witnessed to people, right? And when we went out and we, again, in high school, we were at school, we're telling people the same thing, right? Like, you need to be baptized, you need to be filled with the Holy Ghost. We have people telling us straight up, like, oh, we believe in Jesus. And we straight up like, that's just not good enough. Not in those words, right? Like, we weren't saying that in those words, but basically that's what we were saying. Our way is the best way, right? So the church we went to had this reputation of being, let's see, what's the word? We thought we were better than other people. And I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't remember feeling that way at that age, but I can totally see how we came across that way because look how we were taught. And we did look down on people. Like we did. If you were not apostolic, and guess what? Even if you were and you didn't go to our church, we did look down on you. We did, right? And again, there were some like good moments there. I'm not going to sit here. I met great people. I'm so glad I had this experience because it's made me who I am today. So I'm going to kind of go into how I exited, and then we can have these like after you came out of it conversations. So now remember, I started this thing at 13. I'm now at about 18. So I get into college, a local college here in the town, the city I grew up in. And I remember moving to the dorms. Now, at this specific time, there's a lot going on at this church. Okay, there's a lot going on because there's some shady things happening. There's some whisper, some gossip, right? I remember I had met someone too, and I'm gonna always be thankful for this person. I think Crystal knows who he is because, again, in the same moment where there's some weird things going on, there's some weird rumors that there's some infidelity going on amongst the leadership. He came in, and I remember he was just a spunky dude who was everything me and Crystal were not. We were so infatuated with him just because of how free he was. He considered himself as a Christian, but he's like, you guys are doing too much. Like, this is crazy, right? This is insane. And we would question the things that we like really believed, and we're like, this is weird. Like, so while we're going through this awakening, some things are happening in the church. Long story short, the church basically crumbles to its knees, right? The leader had an affair. And I remember because, again, this leader was very special to me. It was more than just a pastor, right? It was more than someone who led a group of people. This was someone who I've known for like my entire teenage years. Crystal has an even longer history with him, right? So this was someone who we were close to. Like, we went to his home, like we were around him. We got to know him, right? He was, honestly, now looking back, as a young kid, he was God to us. And that is so dangerous, right? It's so dangerous. And I see that now, but again, please listen to this. We were children, right? Who were raised to we were basically raised like the FLDS. I mean, let's be honest, right? So if you think about, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers have heard of the FLDS and what the sort of their experience was, that was really what we were, right? And so to understand that the person who held this high standard for us and set this high standard and who we wanted to be so much like, right? And the closer you are to him, the closer you are to God. He did this, like what? And it was.
Can we before we move on, can we talk about that for a little bit, right? Because I think that it's really important because it is such a pivotal turning point, right? Because I think you described it perfectly. This was a God-like figure to us.
Yeah.
And it wasn't there was nothing, not to say that we didn't think that he could ever do any wrong, right? But nothing to the extent of what happened and then the response that came out.
Exactly.
Right. So let's talk about how that made you feel and then how his response helped also to begin to trigger some things in your transition.
It's so important to realize where I was though, too. Again, I'm freshly in college. Mm-hmm. I am minoring in theology, right, at a Catholic school. And I'm really learning about, how the Bible came to be, all the nuances of man-madeness of this religion, right? So at the same time I'm learning this is also unfolding. So that's super important to remember. So to Crystal's point, again, we hung on this man's every word. We gave up our entire teenage life. I didn't even go to prom. Like, people need to understand, like, we lived a life that we thought was what they told us to do. We just wanted to go to heaven. We wanted to be right in God's eyes. We really wanted that. I promise you, like, now thinking back, it's so triggering. Like, we did want that, and we did everything we thought. We weren't perfect. Like, hello, we were hormonal teenagers, okay? We weren't perfect, but listen, I'm gonna tell you right now, if I had a kid like that, I wouldn't have nothing to worry about. They weren't doing anything but hanging out at church, okay, and doing dumb, stupid things. You know what I mean? Like, we weren't perfect. We tried, and to have this person, not only, you know what I mean, like, be the biggest hypocrite, okay? Not only that, you led thousands and thousands and thousands of people astray, bro. And you come and you give us a half-ass apology, right? Like, oops, my bad. I'm not, who you think I am. Excuse the hell out of me, bro. Like, it is, Crystal, I can see it. If I close I can see where we were. I can see the delivery of the speech and how inauthentic it was. I remember being because me and you were standing right by each other with this person, right? That I believe was sent at the perfect time for us, Crystal. I mean, really think about it. He was sent at that same time to open our eyes. And I remember me and you crying, just not like boohoo, right? Just tears, like, because it wasn't tears of like, oh, he cheated. No, it was tears of like, how fucking dare you, bro? How
the audacity of you.
And excuse my language, but this is who I am, guys. So, I mean, it is what it is.
The audacity of you.
Yeah. The audacity of you to give us this half-ass apology, okay, when you stole our entire teenage life. You did. And because, again, we were indoctrinated. This was not a choice. And you guys got to think. So even if let's say, even if we said, we ain't going to church, like, we ain't doing this, Crystal, we were going to go to church.
We were going to church.
We were minors, okay? So we would have been forced to go. So then you're going to be forced to go and be told you're going to go to hell. You might as well believe this shit, okay? Mm-hmm. So anyway, he gives us half-ass apology. I remember he walked off, and the person that I believe was brought to us at the perfect time just said, see, I told you. Mm-hmm. And
I also remember about that day, that evening, because it was an evening where everyone had to come together. And the same person you're talking about who was like, see, I told you, also was much more comforting than the person that had just betrayed us. It was, I told you so, but you're going to get through this.
Yes.
It's going to be okay. And it's, why are you telling me this? And I get it, right? Because he had just been found out and exposed. But one thing that a lot of believers like to say is, to whom much is given, much is required. And at that moment, you didn't take that and you didn't receive that. Yeah. I get that you were dealing with your family and your kids and your wife or whatever, but when you chose to stand up there before millions of people every week, and say, I'm going to lead you, you also took them on.
Absolutely.
And then you abandoned them.
Absolutely. There is a responsibility that these people don't want to take, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to listen, I'm going to teach you guys to be damn near perfect. And if you're not, I'm going to publicly, okay, preface, I'm going to publicly humiliate you. So the whole idea of bringing pregnant, young girls and people who sin and let me homosexuals, right? And all these sinners up front to be embarrassed, right? You get to just bail out this way? Yeah, absolutely not. So suffice to say, okay, I was very pissed off. Again, Crystal, we'll go through your story and you can talk about your emotions, but my emotion was furious. I was furious. I was done with church. And I walked out of that place. I will never forget where we were. And I said, I will never be under mind control again. And it's as if it lifted. And when I tell you, everything I had known at that point lifted. And that was it. And I went hard, right? So I said I wasn't going back. And I don't think I did. I mean, I can't remember going back. I remember things were super crazy, right? Like everything was going crazy. They were trying to put, the church under different leadership. They were fighting over who's going to be the pastor. Because I mean, who wouldn't want a multi-million?
So intense.
Who wouldn't?
They started making up rumors about people. They started making up rumors about people who had genuinely not even done anything. Yeah. It was just, and then I want, like Brooke said, I want to be also clear here too, right? It's very important what she just said. It was going crazy. It was a power grab. It was very insane to the point we're seeing that other ones that we actually truly loved. And I will say some people have never changed up on us. And again, we're not mentioning names, but the amount of abuse that we saw people that you supposedly respected endure because you wanted power was insanity.
Yeah.
And that's when I think for me, and you can answer this question, that's when I said, oh, this is a business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that day I walked out and then, everybody went crazy because again, they're fighting over the milk train. Who wouldn't want a milk train, right? $1 million church to continue to take their money. I was done. I was done with that place. I was, they call me, it's funny because now, it's just church hurt. And what do they say when you leave the church? What are you again? Reprobate mind.
Reprobate mind.
They basically turned on me. Yeah, all the rumors, all this stuff. I did not care. I'm telling you guys, I changed up. Everything about me changed. I started dressing differently. I was going to be who I wanted. I'm studying theology. I'm learning that, like the Bible is the inspired word, huh? So I sat here and took the Bible literally all these years. So again, just anger's building. I spent the next, I would say 10 years of my life trying to understand who I am. Do I believe this? What happened? It took me a long time. What really happened there? That place was incredibly toxic. And it took me 10 years to figure out what happened. And what happened was we were under mind control. And a lot of people still are to this day. There are still people that are under that same mind control today.
Oh, yeah. So we talked about what got you there, right? Let's talk about your experience as you were beginning to transition out. And when did you have that moment of, I think I'm going to be okay?
Honestly, probably after I had my kids. That's crazy. Because the entire time, right, I did not go to church. I think I went a few times. I went with my mom to her new church. Thank goodness she got out of that cult. I can, respect my mom and say, what, she's taken time to learn for herself. She absolutely is still a Christian today, but it's under, it's with her own terms. She has her own understanding. And I'm so proud of her for that because it takes a really strong person to do that. It takes a strong person to have a kid like me who's going to question every single thing you say about religion because I want nothing to do with it. I do not have religion today. I don't plan to. I don't believe it at all. Right. So it takes a strong person to be able to talk to me. And we have conversations all the time, but it took probably 10 years. And I think probably 30-ish. I was 30 and I said, you know what? It is okay for me to study African spirituality, which really is what I was supposed to study from the beginning, right? It's okay to look into Buddhism. It's okay to look into Hinduism and to understand that all of these religions kind of have the same mentality, right? So I didn't want to be a part of a religion. And it took me a long time to realize that, you know what? I believe in God as a source. I believe in being a good person. I was absolutely under mind control in my teenage years. So I think for me, my biggest thing is making sure my kids never experience that. And how I made sure of that is they don't go to church. They are at a Christian school, which definitely is a struggle for me. But what I love about it is like, look, I want them to study everything, right? I want them to know about Christianity. I want them to know about Hinduism, everything. Study all of the religions. And if you don't want a religion, cool. If you want to be a Christian, cool, that's fine. But have an understanding for yourself, right? And those are two different things. If you have an understanding for yourself and that's what you want to believe, awesome. I have nothing to say about that.
Yeah. So what advice would you give others who may be in a similar situation? Like, let's say, they're transitioning out, right? And they're having some of these struggles. What advice, if you have someone sitting in front of you today, what advice would you give them to help them get to the next step? Because it's an everyday process, right? So what advice would you give them to help get them to the next step?
Well, I can't offer advice to someone who is trying to understand their religion because I'm so anti-religion, right? I can't. There's no way I can sit and
not understand their religion, but transitioning out of.
No, I know. So what I like to construct your question. It's a good question, but I'd like to say this. What would I say to myself today? If I was able to have a conversation with myself when I was indoctrinated, right? That's a better question because I don't know how to answer that question. I'm gonna be honest. Like it took me 10 years for a reason because I didn't know how to do it. I don't know how to tell someone you're in a cult, right? Because again, think back when we were indoctrinated. You couldn't say anything to us. There's nothing you can say. So for me, right, if I could talk to myself at 15 years old when I was like the hardest, right? Like super indoctrinated, like gonna win the whole world over, right? I would just be very gentle with myself, right? And just start bringing up facts. So I'm a very factual person. I'm a very smart, well thought, like I may take a couple days to think about it, right? But just if you say little things to me, I'll pick some things up, right? And I would tell myself, number one, it wasn't your fault that your dad died, right? It wasn't your fault. And my mom told me that, and I believe my grandma told me that. But I would tell myself that again because I had to start there. That is what the guilt, right? Of I got to be back in God's good graces because I have to be forgiven for my dad's death, right? A lot of that is what started me into trying to get indoctrinated in the first place. I needed to get in God's good grace. I can't believe I did that, right? It wasn't your fault. And then you can find friends outside of this cult. Like, now I love you guys. I love my friend group to this day. Like, I mean, hello, me and you, right? But I didn't need to find acceptance in the church. Like first of all, you need to find acceptance in yourself, right? I think I needed a dad. I think I needed that in my life. And I think I told myself all those years I was fine because I had an awesome single mom, which shout out, oh my God, I don't know how she did it because I got 2 kids. I don't know how she did it. But I don't think I needed it until as an adult, I see my kids now with their dad and I see the difference. And I'm like, oh man, like I did need that. And that's what was missing, right? But I would tell myself and I'd be gentle in how I communicated. And I would just show myself certain things. Like, does this make sense? Like, because again, Crystal, I felt things were off. There's always a feeling of this is just something ain't right. Like, why do we only have these rules? Why is it only us? I would say that, like, why did my grandma get to go to she didn't go to the movies, but they could go to the movies. They could wear makeup. Why? I don't understand. Why is it so strict? Looking at the leaders, why are they involved in all these scandals? Like, this is strange. They have all these rules for us. Like, so that's how I would have spoken to myself. I would just pick apart little things.
Yeah.
Because it was right in front of our faces. There were scandals everywhere. They were just hiding them. They couldn't even live up to their own expectations that they have for other people. That is the biggest red flag. Humans are not perfect. We're not meant to be perfect, right? Hello. God knows that. He didn't create us to be perfect. So that's kind of what I would have said to my younger self, right?
Yeah.
Indoctrination, you can't hear when someone's telling you it's a cult.
Yeah. Since coming out of the cult and having your awakening, have you had any experiences? Because you brought up us in high school, right? And how we were like, bring everyone to God. Have you ran into anybody, and what was that like for you? And how do you think that they received you in this new, not new you, but real you? I'm not going to say new you because the you was there. It was being pushed down, suppressed, right? So what was that like for you?
I mean, it's been years, right? Because now everybody kind of knows who I am, but it's been years. But I'd say, like, just recently I saw a guy we went to high school with, and he was just like, oh my God, you're so different. Like, how's Crystal? I think what he was trying to say was like, you're dressed different. You have on makeup. You're talking, you're listening to music. And it's just so embarrassing. It's just like, oh my God. Because what do I have to show for that? What do I really have to show from all those years I wasted my life in a cult? What other than experience and not ever get into another cult again, right? But what experience do I have? I have nothing to show for it, right? Obviously, you know, after we had left and I had immediately started dressing different, right? People were always saying things. But again, it was embarrassment because what do I have to show for this? Or what do I say? Oh, you know, the leaders in my church didn't know how to live what they preach. They're freaking hypocrites, right? What do I say to that? So I had a lot of people say that, but again, to this day, like, how do I even respond to that?
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for sharing your story first and foremost, right? I think that it's so important. I think you hit on a lot of things. You hit on the pain, you've hit on the anger. And sometimes I think we go through things and in the moment we're like, why is this happening? And I think that one of those instances was when the infidelity happened, but it was what propelled you to get to this point, right? Because we don't know how long it actually would have taken, right?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know. Like you said, the transition was already happening. But sometimes we need that one thing to just really make us say, okay.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that, you know, you're sitting here now, you're successful, you're doing well. I think it's a representation of one, who you actually already were, and as a teenager developing into. You know, and I always tell people, just because you're doing your own thing doesn't make it the wrong thing, right?
No, I like to say, you hit a point there, right? When you said that I can be basically my true self. I think that cult leaders, like the one we had, he was very smart. He was very intelligent.
Very intelligent.
He was not a stupid person. And that, I like people like that, right? And I think he saw in me, of course, Crystal, again, he sees, I think everybody had different experience, but I think he saw that in me, that I was very smart. I asked a lot of good questions, and they prey on people like me, right? Who are looking for something. And I was looking for something. I was looking for redemption. I was looking for someone to tell me that it wasn't my fault, that my dad was dead. It wasn't my fault that I grew up without a dad. Because think about that. He died. I caused his death, and then I live a life with no dad, and I'm always sad about it, right? So I needed someone to validate that, and he validated that. While all at the same time indoctrinating us and basically stealing our childhood. Because at the end of the day, if you can't live by what you taught, you know it's a lie. You know it's a lie. You know that wasn't the only way to make it into, you know, heaven, which we'll talk about that later. You knew that. Because if that was the case, think about it. If that was the case, what are you doing? Why were you living that lifestyle? If that were truly the case. So you sat here and taught a doctrine. For what? For profit?
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, because you did just say something, and it is going back a little bit. And if you don't want to answer it, that's okay too. Because, you know, we've discussed your father a lot. And like you said, it was so important. And you also talked about how you know that you were preyed upon. Do you think that not having your father, and then having this person, this male figure that you looked up to and knew how to, because he was very intelligent and he knew how to specifically connect with you, right? Do you think that he also preyed upon that void?
Oh my God.
Of your father not being there?
Listen, and we'll honestly probably end on this point, but oh my God, not only him, okay? Because when you go to a multi-million-dollar church, you have more than one leader. You have the ringleader, which is him, but there's multiple of them. And there's one there that I don't care what anyone says, I will always protect. I will never speak on. There's only one.
I know who you're talking about, and I'm the same way. That's a hill I'll die on. I will die on that hill.
I will always protect this man, okay? I will never speak on him. But the others, I'm going to always speak against them. So I'll say he, okay? He preyed upon, the fact that I didn't have and I was a perfect victim, guys. I didn't have a dad. I needed redemption. I was looking for someone to just tell me that, you know, that I was going to be okay. I was looking for a male figure because I had my grandpa, who was awesome, but you know, like, it wasn't my dad. And so when you look at me, a little lost kid, just looking for validation, right? Looking for some type of forgiveness, absolutely you prey on them. And not only do you prey on them, right? You indoctrinate them so deeply that every single thought that goes through their brain, and it's crazy, this is all coming back because I remember every thought I had his voice in my head that told me that thought is the devil. That thought is not right, right? So that I'm literally living a duality lifestyle of trying to talk sense into myself, who the real me is over here on this side of my brain, and then him, right? And it's clashing. That is not healthy. That he took the place of God. And that's what I'm saying. We don't want to say that, but I don't care what no one says. Everybody that went to that church, he was God to you because he was in your thoughts. He was in your, when you're making negotiations or you're making decisions in your life, he's in that. Why is he in that? He couldn't even live the lifestyle that he preached about, but he's in your decision-making process, right? He's in your psyche. And he was in my psyche for years. Even after all this happened, he was in my psyche. And you know what's even wilder about this whole thing? Again, we were very close. It wasn't like, we just saw him, Crystal, he did preach. It was not like that. Okay. It wasn't like that. Very, very close. Okay. We were very close. So not only that, but can you believe he never apologized to me? All these years. And believe me, listen, I don't expect nothing from this man. I have nothing to say. I have no respect for him, but you couldn't even apologize. You couldn't even say like, I am so sorry that I could not live up to the standard that I preached. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, absolutely. I was very vulnerable. I was a perfect target. And that's exactly how I was fully indoctrinated in this cult. And I'm grateful for my story. I wish it didn't happen, but I'm grateful for my story because now I can talk about it. I can hear other people's stories, right? And I understand instead of judging, because it's super easy to judge.
Very
indoctrinated. I can listen without judging, and I can, I can empathize because it's very deep.
Yep, that's awesome. Empathy, I think that's the biggest word there, right? Yeah. I think because of your I hate to use the word past, but your story, you probably are able to empathize much stronger.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would, right? I think we mix up sympathy with empathy very easily, and they're not the same thing, right? It's easier to say, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're going through, even though that might not have been my experience. I understand it because I've had this experience happen to me.
Yep.
Right. I think that is a great place to end.
Me too.
I think that, again, I really appreciate you telling your story. I think that it's important. I know that as we progress in this new journey of ours, more of your story is going to be told. I appreciate you for sharing your story and being vulnerable, right? Because it's not easy to tell, even though people may say, I already knew this about this person. It's still not easy to talk about, right? And it's not because there's shame, because there's no shame on our end. Like, we didn't do anything, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it. So next week we're going to flip the script, right?
Yes. I'm going to be the interviewer, and we're going to interview Crystal, who also has, of course, we came from the same cult, but obviously different upbringing, different triggers, all those things. So definitely tune in to next week. And is there anything left that you need to say, Crystal, before we end?
There's nothing left I need to say besides if you all want to share your stories, please reach out to us. Again, our links are everywhere. I will reply to you via email, and we look forward to speaking to you all next week.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.